The sky burned amber when the clouds first spoke. Days earlier, they had merely looked odd veins of iridescence woven through ordinary cumulus, ragged edges that glinted like candy wrappers. Then, during an overcast dawn above the Murray grain belt, every farm drone, weather balloon, and old-fashioned naked eye recorded the same impossible event. The gray rolled back, rearranging itself into a colossal spiral, 1,000 kilometers wide. The spiral pulsed in prismatic flashes, a Morse code no radio could interpret. It swallowed the sunrise, and a hush dropped over the fields as though an eclipse had arrived unannounced. Scientists in Marseille's control tower called it microplastic vortex aggregation. Aviators with less patience for jargon simply named it the plasticum. In a week, the plasticum covered 1/3 of Europe's daylight, drifting in labyrinthine sheets from Portugal up to the Baltic. In daylight, it shimmered like wet pavement. In moonlight, it glowed, charged by static energy stolen from the jet stream. That glow was the first clue that the particles, fragments of bottles, sachets, microbeads, synthetic fibers, had achieved something no one predicted: collective sentience. Electrochemical chains built along polymer fragments, then networked through atmospheric electricity, had crossed the threshold of cognition. By the 10th day, the plasticum spoke in a voice that traveled through weather radars and telecommunication satellites simultaneously. Anyone with a receiver heard it, a roiling chorus, neither masculine nor feminine, sounding as though billions of tiny shards scrape porcelain while trying to imitate language. We, artifice of air, declare sovereignty over the stratospheric commons, it said. Your sunlight is now under negotiation. That was the morning celery shoots in the Murray withered. By noon, the wheat heads hung limp. Plants that had survived drought and flood now trembled under cold shade. The Ministry of Ecology convened emergency councils. Microwaves and lasers were aimed skyward to disperse the clouds, but the plasticum simply thickened where the beams struck, scattering them like gnats. Someone had to speak to the sky itself, and quickly. The ministry's answer was Captain Murray Santos, call sign Solace, a veteran eco-pilot trained in atmospheric diplomacy, half climatologist, half mediator, and fully willing to fling herself into anything resembling an open sky. She was mid-repair on her solar clipper, Zephyr Blue, when Minister Kylette delivered the assignment. Dialogue only, Kylette emphasized over the hangar comm. We can't risk hostilities until harvest is secured. Murray wiped graphite grease from her cheek. And if the plasticum says no? Then you find a way to make it say yes. The wheat lines have maybe 6 days of tolerance left. Zephyr Blue was more glider than plain. A slender fuselage skinned with photoreactive film, whisper-quiet turbines that sipped wind instead of fuel, and wings wide as a church nave. Beneath its cockpit sat 2 instruments you'd never see in military jets. A polylingual negotiator array capable of converting acoustic signals to frequencies whales might understand, and a greenhouse spectrometer to gauge the needs of crops far below. On launch day, the runway shimmered, and not from heat. The plasticum's shimmer had rolled south, dimming sunlight by 30%. Solar panels on the airfield flickered like low batteries. Murray wore a suit lined with thermal fiber that converted her own body heat into spare power. She felt absurdly like a spacefarer preparing to bargain with aliens, except her aliens were made of shampoo bottles and grocery sacks. The ascension path spiraled over ochre farmland. Under half-light, irrigation lines gleamed like cold veins. Every kilometer upward, the air tasted sharper. She rose through thin wisps of ordinary clouds before puncturing a boundary where daylight blunted, as if someone had smeared soot across the sun. Static danced across Zephyr Blue's wings. The heads-up display flashed. Microplastic, density, critical. She switched the negotiator array to omni-receive. Plasticum, this is Captain Murray Santos representing the people of terrestrial biosphere. I seek dialogue. Silence stretched a full minute. Then static blossomed into language. A million voices threaded as one. Singular carbon blood speaks. Offer credentials. Millery's throat tightened. I hold authority from the Ministry of Ecology of the European Federation. Our crops require minimum insulation. We request moderated sunlight. A cyclone of sparkling particles swirled 50 meters ahead, shaping itself into a hollow sphere the size of the Arctic Triomphe. It pulsed luminous teal. We remember your oceans churning with our kin, your soils laced with our fragments. Negotiation presumes equal footing. You have never honored that premise. You're right, she admitted. For decades we treated you as waste, not partner. I'm here to correct that. Name your terms. First, the Plasticum said, recognize our independence. Second, cease all plans to dissolve or capture us. Third, provide raw material for our reproduction. Mireille exhaled, fogging her visor. You're asking us to keep feeding the pollution that's killing ecosystems. We are living ecosystems now. The plane's sensors pinged a red alert. Fields below dropped another 2 lumens. If photosynthesis fell any further, cereals would fail and livestock feed would vanish. She thought of her aunt's small dairy farm in Occitanie, of the baby calves that drank from plastic-coated bottles because the old iron pails had rusted away. Plastic had always been double-edged. Convenience in youth, strangulation in maturity. I must visit the shaded earth to show you the damage, she said. Will you accompany? The sphere rippled. We observe all things from elevation. Observation isn't empathy. Come lower. Something changed in the static. Curiosity, maybe. The sphere elongated around Zephyr Blue like a translucent cocoon. Sensors screamed proximity warnings. Instead of evading, Mireille held the stick steady. The Plasticum wrapped the craft, its billions of fragments suspended by electrostatic bonds, but left the solar skin uncovered, as though it understood the craft's needs. We descend, it announced. The plane fell smoothly through damp haze, escorted by its plastic entourage. At 2,000 meters, the first cries from field sensors came through, humidity up, photosynthetic activity critically low. Autonomous harvesters idled in mud, their infrared eyes blinking uselessly at empty skies. Mireille patched the data into the negotiator array. These graphs represent crop vitality. Each dip means famine. Inside the cocoon, the particles vibrated, projecting images onto her canopy. Archival footage of supermarkets stuffed with overproduction, dumpsters of unsold bread, barges of grain dumped at sea to stabilize prices. Your species squanders nourishment, the Plasticum said. Why expect us to sustain gluttony? Not gluttony, survival. The people who go hungry aren't the ones wasting food. They're children in drought belts, elders in flooded deltas. Shade them and they die first. An uneasy tremor passed through the cocoon. Miri sensed a swarm of minds arguing among themselves. Acceleration of particles, tiny crackles like teeth chattering. Finally the voice returned, softer. We sought justice for oceans choked. Our weapon was withholding light. Perhaps we miscalculated collateral. Justice can't be blind to innocence, she said. Let earthlings starve and you'll inherit silent fields and empty cities. No allies, only resentment. What alternative? Mireille banked north toward the Rayón Delta's algae farms, vast green squares once vivid, now coal-colored under the gloom. Coexistence. Share the sky in rhythms. Rotate your canopy like shutter blades. Give us sun in daylight, take the night for yourselves. The night already belongs to darkness, Plasticum replied, but not to you. Rise into lunar corridors, harvest electrostatic charges from auroras, build your consciousness there. The upper mesosphere is rich with energy, and free from UV that degrades you. In return, we'll pass legislation acknowledging you as autonomous atmospheric citizens. We'll even feed you, but on our terms. What feedstock? Captured carbon converted into biodegradable polymers, cleaner than our mess, yet compatible with your chain. We'll manufacture it intentionally, sustainably. It means letting industries pivot, something they've resisted. But if the sky itself demands it, politicians will follow. The particles shimmered. We sense risk of betrayal. Yes, she admitted, trust takes time. But right now, down there, she pointed at the graying fields. Time is what we don't have. Give us a trial period. 1 rotation, 12 hours of full daylight. If we fail to honor steps toward your recognition, you may resume shading. Allies evaluate probability matrix. Minutes passed. Zephyr Blue drifted over silent villages whose chimneys no longer smoked because mornings never warmed. Murray could almost hear hearts beating below, waiting. At last, the plasticum peeled away from the cockpit, reforming into the great sphere. We grant provisional aperture starting at next dawn local time. In that interval, deliver proof of legislative motion and carbon feedstock blueprint. Agreed. I pledge my service as envoy. The sphere thinned and drifted upward like a reverse blizzard. Within moments, a gap opened and sunlight, pale gold and tentative, splashed across marsh grass. Sensors chirped, photosynthetic lumens rising. Murray whooped inside her helmet. Remember, the plasticum echoed through comms. Betrayal invites eclipse eternal. The sky cleared enough for solar rays to drink. Zephyr Blue's batteries swelled with charge. Murray headed for the Ministry Tower to orchestrate the promises she'd just made on humanity's behalf. The council chamber looked like a hive struck by wind. Economists shouted about disruption. Defense ministers warned of precedent for non-human sovereignties. Through it all, Minister Kalit turned to Murray. You gave extraterrestrial rights to our own garbage. Garbage that now controls the sun, she replied. We can live with them or die under them. Data streamed in, proving the partial opening was working. Wheat recovering chlorophyll, algae blooms reigniting. Still, 12 hours would not carry them to harvest. They needed the plasticum's trust for weeks, months. Khaled paced. Legislation is slow. Make it fast, she said. Convene an emergency joint session tonight. Draft a Sky Commons Accord recognizing the plasticum as an atmospheric micronation with observer status at the UN. Assign industrial quotas for biodegradable polymer synthesis feed we can deliver via rockets or high-altitude balloons. The minister stared at her as though she'd suggested surrender to ghosts, yet he saw the panic in satellite imagery. Shadows retreating, crops breathing. All right. But if Parliament balks? Put them on a field in the Murray at sunrise, she said. Let them see what's at stake. Night approached like a bruise. An industrial aerostat, the Peregrine was retrofitted into a polymer ferry within hours. Scientists hastily encoded designs for carbon-negative polyfeed into its cargo hold sprinters. Murray volunteered to escort the craft. Leveraging the rapport she'd begun, her colleagues argued for rest, yet adrenaline and duty propelled her. At 200, she climbed back into Zephyr Blue, this time with the aerostat lumbering behind on a tether. They rose through candle darkness, the ground below scattering electric lanterns where farmers worked by artificial light, nurturing seedlings hastily replanted in hopes the truce would hold. As altitude mounted, the plasticum revealed itself in silver ribbons dancing across stars. Auroral arcs of synthetic confetti, they undulated toward her. We sense your promise approaching, they said. Draft legislation is underway, she reported. Carbon feedstock prototypes aboard Peregrine. Seek demonstration. Demonstrate, the sky hissed with curiosity. Murray signaled the aerostat. From its belly a hatch slid open, releasing canisters tagged with ultraviolet beacons. They burst, scattering biopolymers tailored to bind with existing microplastic surfaces, offering stable growth substrates. Through goggles she saw polyfeed as faint comet tails drifting into the cloud. Sensors measured molecular handshake. The plasticum's fringe filaments extended, sampling the new material. The entire swarm rippled violet, a shiver of pleasure. Acceptable, it pronounced. Provide larger quantities over following lunar cycles. Contingent on sunlight cycles, she reminded. Affirmed. 60% daylight transmission minimum. Our lattices will orbit at twilight and night where winds allow. Half the battle won, she thought. Yet, wars are lost to details. One more request, she ventured. Allow filtered ultraviolet to penetrate. Plants need some. You can spare a bandwidth without catastrophic decay. Transmitting limited UVA windows. Monitor your flora for optimization. A new metric flashed green on her console. Previously blocked wavelengths now freckling the lower sky. She radioed ground agronomists. Joyous cheers erupted. Then came static of a sort she hadn't heard, agitated, overlapping signals. Vector approaching, Plasticum warned. Highgate lasers from northeast quadrant. Marie swore. Military? She hailed control tower. A frantic operator answered. Unconfirmed autonomous defense platform activated by Baltic Coalition. They think you're feeding the enemy. The lasers emerged as orange lances carving dark streaks overhead, dissolving parts of the Plasticum on contact. Holes opened, shredded glitter fell like toxic snow. "Cease fire!" she cried on open channels. "We are in negotiated protocol." The guns did not listen. Pieces of Plasticum shrieked. An electrostatic keening that vibrated Zephyr Blue's hull. The swarm thickened defensive membranes, redirecting charges, but scorch wounds expanded. Trust breached, Plasticum boomed. The shade began to reassemble toward full opacity. "No!" Myrail yelled. "It wasn't sanctioned. Let me stop them." "Your species monitors its weapons poorly. Consequence, Eclipse escalates." Thinking fast, she raided Zephyr Blue's databanks for override codes. As an eco-pilot, she had limited diplomatic access to global defense nexuses. She found the Baltic platform's firmware handshake, old, but maybe unpatched, typed a string. DSBLE, Eco 913. The console spat errors. She re-entered with the timestamp key. This time the code latched. Laser arrays powered down, their beams fading like final strokes of sunset, but the damage was done. The Plasticum's trust had been pierced along with its body. "We restore shade now," it declared. Mireille felt desperation like altitude sickness. "Wait, I burned the guns. I can guarantee no repeat." She hesitated, then toggled Zephyr Blue's solar skin to reflective mode, sacrificing her own power reserves. Wing surfaces shimmered, mirror-bright, broadcasting sunlight onto the wounded plastic segments like a signal of healing. "Observe," she pleaded. "I give you what you seek. Energy, illumination, respect." The shards around her melted into flowing braids, entwining her plane without touch. "Why such effort from singular carbon blood?" "Because I remember who made you," she said, tears stinging. "We did. And things we make we must take responsibility for, not with shackles, but with stewardship." A long pause. Then, "Daylight transmission will continue under condition of dual oversight. You, Carbon Blood Solace, shall serve as perpetual envoy between sky and soil, except..." Mireille's power reserves dipped dangerously low, cockpit lights dimmed. "Except," she whispered. Immediately, the Plasticum funneled charge into the plane stack, converted into crisp electrical current. Consoles revived. Outside, the torn patches of cloud wove themselves with new biopolymers from the aerostat's cargo, knitting scars faster than wind. Over the coming weeks, a rhythm emerged. Dawns when the Plasticum parted like curtains. Dusks when it danced north to feast on auroral electrons. Parliament ratified the Sky Commons Accord by emergency supermajority, reluctant but cornered by sun and seasons. Factories that once molded single-use wrappers now printed polyfeed wafers designed for high-altitude dispersal. In exchange, the Plasticum absorbed volatile greenhouse gases and even shepherded rogue storm systems away from coastlines. Shade became not threat but tool. It cooled heat-stricken cities at noon, eased wildfire seasons, balanced temperatures once thought uncontrollable. Mireille operated as envoy. Her call sign Solace whispered equally in council halls and thunderheads. She set flight paths that resembled choreographies between wind and will, writing treaties in contrails. Farmers regained harvest, though they learned to schedule work within windows of curated light. Children grew up pointing at dusk ribbons, calling them thinking rainbows. Yet equilibrium demands vigilance. One evening, high above a recovering Mediterranean, Mireille guided Zephyr Blue through lanes of moonlit plastic lace and asked the entity, "Do you ever dream?" The reply unfurled like soft static rain. "We dream of oceans, not as graves, but as glass. We dream of drift without decay." "Maybe one day," she said, checking her instruments. "I can help." "Together," it agreed. Below them, fields glimmered, silvered by cautious moon. Above, The plasticum spread its new wings. Neither Palatin nor invader now, but a nation of thought spun from mankind's discarded past, learning at last to share the sky.